You're leaving everything to him? My voice cracked louder than I meant, slicing through the ballroom's applause. Crystal glasses stilled in midair. My parents stood at the center, their arms linked, their faces glowing under the chandelier, as if they'd just been crowned royalty. My father raised his glass higher, undeterred. Our son, Christopher, represents the future of Bennett Lumber, the next generation of strength and vision. The crowd erupted again, clinking glasses in celebration, but every cheer drove a nail deeper into my chest. For 35 years, I believed being the oldest son meant something. I'd spent half my life swallowing sawdust and sweat, learning every gear in every mill, rising before dawn to make sure shipments left on time. But here, in front of 200 guests, I learned I was nothing more than a shadow keeping the lights on for the chosen one. Christopher stood smug in his designer suit, Harvard ring catching the light, flashing the same politician's grin he'd worn since he was 12. My wife, Caroline, gripped my hand under the table, her nails pressing hard into my skin. Across from us, my 8-year-old daughter whispered, "Daddy, why didn't Grandpa say your name?" The innocence in her voice gutted me more than my father's speech. I pushed back from the table, the scrape of my chair echoing louder than the applause. I walked out before anyone could stop me, the grand chandelier shrinking behind me with each step. Outside, the autumn air bit sharp and cold, but it cleared my head in a way no toast ever could. A woman leaned against a black sedan, a folder tucked under her arm. "Mr. Bennett?" Her voice was steady, deliberate. She introduced herself as Eleanor Kane, and without hesitation, she pressed the folder into my hands. "They've been lying to you your entire life." I flipped it open under the parking lot lights. Photographs that didn't make sense. Papers stamped and notarized in states I'd never been to. And at the bottom, a will with my name where my brother's should have been. I stared at the evidence, my pulse thundering. What the hell is this? Eleanor's eyes didn't waver. Proof your brother isn't who he claims to be. Proof your parents have built this empire on deception. And proof you are the rightful heir. My father had always preached that Bennett Lumber was built on family, faith, and sweat. Turns out, it was built on lies. That night, I thought I'd lost everything. But the truth I held in my hands told me something else entirely. My parents' greatest fear wasn't that I'd fail to uphold the Bennett name. It was that I'd learn I was the only true Bennett left. I was awake before the sun, not because I had to be, but because 2 decades of rising early had trained my body to reject comfort. Beside me, Caroline lay still, her dark hair scattered across the pillow, one arm stretched over the space where Emily usually curled in during the night. "You're going to wear a hole through the floor," she murmured without opening her eyes. I stopped pacing. "Didn't mean to wake you. You've been restless all week, James. What's going on?" I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. They were my father's hands, big, worn, scarred from years of work that actually broke the skin. Dad's been meeting with Christopher every day, behind closed doors. And yesterday, I saw Harrison Breener's car in the drive. The estate lawyer? Her eyes opened now, sharp and awake. "Yeah." I turned to her. "Something's happening, Caroline. Something big." She sat up and touched my face softly, trying to steady me. "Maybe it's finally the moment you've been waiting for. You've been carrying the company for years. Maybe they're ready to make it official." She wasn't wrong. When my father was off at golf courses or retreats with investors, and Christopher was working on his tan at country clubs, I was the one at the mills before dawn. I was the one smoothing out union disputes, negotiating shipments, and keeping contracts alive. When Holbrook Construction threatened to walk, I drove through a snowstorm to Boston myself to close the deal. When the Montpelier mill caught fire, I lived 3 months in a trailer on site to get it rebuilt. "Maybe," I said, though my gut told me otherwise. The Bennett estate sat on 200 acres of pristine Vermont land, the main house looming over it all like some old monarch. Growing up there should have felt like a gift, but it only ever felt like work. Christopher got the ski trips in Aspen, the writing tutors, the summers abroad. I got shifts at the mill starting at 14, learning everything from the ground up, because my father always said the eldest son needed to know every inch of what he'd one day inherit. By noon, the grounds looked like a spread from a glossy magazine. White tents arched over the lawn, chandeliers hung from oak branches, and a string quartet tuned near the imported Italian fountain my mother adored. Staff bustled everywhere in black and white uniforms, arranging flowers, stocking bars, polishing crystal. I found my Uncle Vaughn near the bar setup, sleeves rolled up, keeping an eye on the staff. He clapped my shoulder hard. "James, you ready for tonight?" "As ready as I'll ever be. You know what Dad's planning." For a fraction of a second, his smile faltered. "Your father keeps his own counsel. You know that. But whatever happens, remember, family is family." It was a strange thing to say, and I barely had time to process it before Christopher appeared with his latest arm candy. Isabel, something or other, senator's daughter, polished smile, pearls at her ears. She looked like she'd been grown in a lab to be a political wife. "James," Christopher said, his voice dipped in that Harvard varnish, stretching my name into something unpleasant. "Father wants you in his study. Now. Says it's important." I didn't answer him, just walked past. The study smelled of leather, oak polish, and the Cuban cigars my father swore he'd quit. Richard Bennett stood by the window, the mills visible in the distance, a king surveying his dominion. "You wanted to see me?" He didn't turn. "James, you've been a good soldier. I want you to know that. A soldier, not a son. You've done what was asked. Learned the ropes. Kept the wheels turning. Your mother and I appreciate that." The way he said it made my stomach tighten, like he was thanking a foreman about to be dismissed. "Dad?" I said, voice low, "What's going on?" He finally turned, his silver hair catching the lamplight, his eyes sharp but unreadable. And in that silence between us, I knew the answer wasn't going to be what I'd spent half a lifetime breaking my back for. Richard finally turned, and for just a flicker I thought I saw regret buried in his eyes. "Tonight your mother and I will be making an announcement about the future of Bennett Lumber," he said carefully, his voice low and deliberate. "Every choice we've made, James, has been for the good of the family legacy. Our family, the Bennett name, that's what matters. The name and what it represents." He moved toward his desk, his fingers brushing across a framed photograph of him and Christopher at Christopher's Harvard graduation. My stomach tightened when I realized there wasn't a single picture of me in this study. Not one. "I should go help Caroline get Emily ready," I muttered, pushing to stand. "James," he said, stopping me at the door. "Whatever happens tonight, remember, you've always had a place in this company." Had. Past tense. That single word told me everything I needed to know. Still, I walked out clinging to a sliver of hope. Hope, I would learn that night, is just disappointment dressed up for Sunday service. By 8 o'clock, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers and the chatter of 200 of Vermont's most powerful families. Politicians, bankers, contractors, socialites. The elite had come to toast Richard and Margaret Bennett's 40 years of marriage and empire. I stood near the bar, a glass of scotch sweating in my hand, watching Christopher glide through the crowd like a senator in training. Every handshake rehearsed, every laugh precisely timed. He hadn't studied lumber at Harvard, he'd studied power. "Daddy, can I have another Shirley Temple?" Emily appeared beside me, her green dress already wrinkled from tumbling around with her cousins. "Last one, sweetheart," I said. "It's nearly bedtime. Please?" Grandma said there's going to be a big announcement. I followed her glance to where my mother stood across the room, sparkling in diamonds, entertaining her garden club friends. When our eyes met, she looked away without hesitation. In all my years working for my father, Margaret Bennett had never once asked how my day was, never once told me she was proud. But Christopher could sneeze, and she'd praise his brilliance. "Uncle James." My cousin Garrett's kids rushed over, chocolate smeared on their faces. "Grandpa Vaughn says you built a treehouse at the mill. Can we see it tomorrow?" I ruffled their hair. "Sure, if your parents say it's okay." That was my role always. The one who built things, fixed things, made things run. The reliable one. The invisible one. The man who didn't need applause because the work itself was supposed to be reward enough. Then my father's voice boomed through the microphone, the chatter falling instantly silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family, thank you for being here to celebrate Margaret and me on this remarkable occasion." Caroline appeared at my side, her hand slipping into mine. "This is it," she whispered. Richard's baritone filled the room. 40 years ago, I married the most beautiful woman in Vermont. Together, we've built something extraordinary. Not just a business, but a legacy. Bennett Lumber employs more than 3,000 people across New England. We've survived recessions, competitors, shifting markets. And we've thrived because of one truth: family comes first. The crowd murmured their approval. I straightened my tie, bracing myself. Any second now, he'd call my name. Margaret took the microphone, her diamonds glittering like cold stars. We've spent months considering the future of everything we've built. The decision wasn't easy, but it was clear. Richard reclaimed the microphone, his tone steady and final. The world is changing. Bennett Lumber must adapt. International markets, digital innovation, modern leadership. It needs someone with the right education, the right connections, the right vision. My chest tightened. Across the ballroom, Christopher was already moving toward the stage, his perfect smile widening, certain of the crown he was about to inherit. Therefore, Richard said, his voice booming through the ballroom, Margaret and I have decided to leave everything. The company, the estate, our entire portfolio, all 74 million of it, to our son. He let the words hang, scanning the crowd before his gaze landed squarely on Christopher. Christopher Bennett. Applause thundered instantly, like a dam breaking. Christopher bounded onto the stage, hugging both of them while cameras flashed, his smile polished to perfection. I couldn't move. The Scotch glass shook in my hand, amber liquid threatening to spill. Caroline's grip on my other hand was the only thing anchoring me to the earth. Did you hear that? Someone whispered behind me. 74 million. Smart choice, though, another replied. Christopher's got that Harvard MBA. And James. A pause. Well, he's good with his hands. But running an empire? That takes sophistication. Margaret's voice rang out again, clear and rehearsed. Christopher represents the future of Bennett Lumber. His education at Harvard Business School, his grasp of global markets, his ties across New England society. These are the tools that will carry our family legacy forward. What about James? Someone shouted from the crowd. I couldn't see who, but I love them for it. Richard's jaw hardened. James has been a valued employee of Bennett Lumber. He'll continue in his role as mill supervisor, reporting to Christopher, of course. Employee. Supervisor. Reporting to Christopher. 20 years of breaking my body and giving my soul to this company reduced to a job title. My birthright tossed to my younger brother like a party favor. James, don't, Caroline whispered, her voice urgent. But I was already moving. I pushed through the crowd, ignoring the murmurs, the confused stares, the speculative whispers. My Uncle Vaughn tried to grab my arm. James, think about this. I have been thinking, for 20 years, I snapped. I've been thinking I mattered. I reached the edge of the stage. My parents finally looked at me, but their eyes were cold, detached, like I was an inconvenience to be managed, not a son to be loved. Nothing to say to me. My voice cut through the silence. The decision is made, Richard said simply. Based on what? My chest burned with anger. That Christopher went to Harvard while I kept your mills running? That he has connections while I have calluses? Tell me, what's this really based on? It's based on what's best for the family, Margaret answered, her tone sharp and dismissive. I am family. The words tore out of me, raw and loud. I'm your firstborn son. I've given everything to this company, to this family, and you stand there calling me an employee? Christopher stepped forward, his politician smile intact. James, let's talk about this privately. You're making a scene. A scene. I laughed, but it came out bitter. You're right, Christopher. The oldest son being erased from his inheritance, that should be handled quietly. Wouldn't want to ruin your celebration. I turned, shoving past the crowd, ignoring the voices calling after me. The October night air slapped me in the face as I burst through the doors. Behind me, I could already hear the quartet resuming, my father's voice smoothing over the chaos, patching the evening back together as if I'd never existed. The parking lot was dark, shadows stretching between the rows of sleek black sedans and polished SUVs. My old Ford pickup looked pitiful among the Mercedes and BMWs. My hands shook as I tried to jam the key into the lock. 20 years, gone, dismissed, erased as if I'd been nothing more than hired help that overstayed his welcome. James Bennett. The voice froze me. I spun around. A woman stood 10 feet away, just outside the glow of a landscape light. She looked to be in her mid-50s, wearing a long black coat that seemed too formal even for a night like this. Her eyes never left mine, steady and deliberate. Her silver hair was pulled into a tight bun, every strand disciplined, and her eyes were sharp, calculating, almost piercing through me. She studied me as though she already knew every answer I might give. "If you're a reporter," I said, more harshly than I intended, "I've got nothing to say." "I'm not a reporter." Her voice was calm, steady. She stepped closer, and under the parking lot lights, her features came into focus. There was a flicker of recognition in me, though I was certain I'd never seen her before. "My name is Eleanor Kane," she said. "I was your parents' accountant years ago, long before you were born. Never heard of you." "You wouldn't have." A faint edge of bitterness lined her words. "Your parents made sure of that." She reached into her coat and drew out a thick manila folder, holding it out like a burden she'd carried too long. "Your Aunt Cordelia asked me to give this to you." I frowned. "I don't have an Aunt Cordelia." "You do. Your father's sister. She left when you were 2 years old. Richard and Margaret erased her from family history the same way they erased you tonight." The folder felt heavy when I took it, heavier than paper should. "Why would they erase her?" "For the same reason they're pushing you aside now." Eleanor's voice didn't waver. She asked questions they couldn't afford to answer. She wouldn't play their game. "Where is she now?" Her gaze softened briefly. "Cordelia passed away last month in Boston. Lung cancer. She never married, never had children. But she never forgot about you." The name tasted foreign in my mouth. "I don't understand any of this." "You will," she said quietly. "Everything you need is in that folder. But James, once you open it, there's no going back. The truth has a way of burning down the comfortable lies we build around ourselves. Lady, in case you missed it, my comfortable lies just got torched in front of 200 people tonight." She almost smiled at that. "No, those were the surface lies, the ones about fairness, merit, earning your place. The real lies run deeper. They go back before you were born, to choices your parents made and have been covering up ever since." My throat tightened. "What kind of choices?" "The kind that involved lawyers, payoffs, and falsified documents. The kind that required Cordelia's disappearance because she knew too much." Eleanor turned slightly, bracing against the October wind. Then she paused and looked back at me. "Your grandfather, Theodore Bennett, was no fool. He knew his son's nature. He knew what Richard was capable of. That's why he put safeguards in place. Legal safeguards your parents have been trying to undo for decades. My grandfather died when I was 10. Yes, but his will lives on. The real one, not the version your parents parade in front of the world." She wrapped her coat tighter around herself. "Read the folder, James. Then call Brennan and Associates in Boston. Tell them Cordelia's nephew is ready to claim what's his. They'll understand." I narrowed my eyes. "And how exactly do I know this isn't some elaborate scam? You could be anyone." Eleanor's expression shifted, softer this time, almost pitying. "Your mother has a crescent-shaped birthmark on her left shoulder blade. She told people it was from an accident as a child. It isn't. Your father has a scar on his right knee from falling off a ladder at the first mill, on the day you were born. Or rather, the day they claimed you were born." My blood went cold. "How could you possibly know those things?" "Because I was there for both," she said, voice low, steady. "I was more than their accountant, James. I was their friend, until I saw what they were capable of." She turned, walking into the night without another word. I slid into my truck, the dome light casting a dim glow over the manila folder resting on my lap. My phone buzzed over and over. Caroline, maybe Christopher, people wondering why I'd stormed out, whether I was okay. But I couldn't face any of them until I opened the folder. I pulled it open with trembling hands. The first page was a black and white photograph, dated March 15th, 1987. It showed my parents standing in a hospital corridor, their faces tight, uneasy, as though they'd been caught in the act. The room spun. Whatever I thought I knew about my family, about myself, was already slipping through my fingers. My mother was cradling a baby, my father standing stiffly beside her. At first glance it seemed ordinary, but the date stamped across the bottom stopped me cold. March 15th, 1987. According to my birth certificate, I wasn't born until June 28th of that year. I turned the page with trembling hands. Another photograph, this one in color. My father again, but not with Margaret. A young woman I didn't recognize held the same infant in her arms. She was striking, dark hair tumbling over her shoulders, her expression both tender and weary. At the bottom, scrawled in blue ink, Helena and Richard with baby James. March 16th, 1987. Helena. I had never heard that name in my life. The next page stole the air from my lungs. A death certificate. Helena Marie Dawson. Date of death, June 28, 1987. Cause, complications from delayed postpartum hemorrhage. June 28th. My so-called birthday. The day she died. My phone vibrated on the seat beside me, Caroline's face lighting up the screen. I silenced it. I couldn't speak to anyone, not yet. Not until I made sense of this. I turned to the next document, and the world I thought I knew began to unravel. A marriage certificate, dated January 3rd, 1987. Richard Bennett and Helena Marie Dawson. My father had been married before. Married 3 months before my supposed birth. I kept reading, every page a hammer blow. Hospital records from Burlington Medical Center. Helena Dawson Bennett delivered a son, James Theodore Bennett, March 15, 1987. Notes from the attending physician detailed severe hemorrhaging, multiple transfusions, a struggle for survival. She had lived through the birth, but not for long. The next document made my hands shake so badly I nearly dropped it. A marriage certificate between Richard Bennett and Margaret Winthrop, dated July 15, 1987. Just 2 weeks after Helena's death, my father remarried. 2 weeks. But the adoption papers shattered whatever was left of my composure. They weren't for me. They were for Christopher Richard Bennett. Adoption finalized in December 1992. Birth mother listed as anonymous. Fee, $50,000. My perfect brother. The golden boy. The heir apparent. Not even a Bennett by blood. A letter was clipped to the file, written in elegant handwriting that seemed to echo from another life. James, if you're reading this, then Richard and Margaret have finally revealed themselves. The truth is brutal. You are Richard's biological son, born to Helena. She died 3 months later, leaving Richard with a choice: raise you alone or find someone to take her place. He chose Margaret, beautiful and ambitious, her family's old money the key to expanding the company. But she had one condition: any child of hers would inherit everything. Richard agreed. Perhaps he thought children would come quickly, but Margaret could not conceive. After years of failure, they bought Christopher from a desperate teenager in Boston. When I discovered the truth, I confronted them. They offered me money to stay silent. When I refused, they destroyed me, spread lies of embezzlement, ruined my career, forced me out of Vermont. I went to Boston with nothing but the truth and began collecting proof. If this letter is in your hands, then you know now who you are and who Christopher truly is. My chest felt tight, as though the walls of the truck were closing in. My hands flipped the page almost on their own, desperate and terrified at once. It was a will. Not my father's. My grandfather's. Theodore Bennett, dated September 3rd, 1999. A paragraph was highlighted in yellow, the ink still vivid even after decades. And as my eyes fell on the words, I understood why my parents had spent their lives burying the past. To prevent any future dispute or manipulation regarding my estate or the continuation of Bennett Industries, I hereby declare that all assets, properties, and controlling shares shall pass solely to my biological descendants. This includes only those who share verified DNA lineage with myself and my son, Richard Bennett. If Richard attempts to bypass this directive by naming a non-biological heir, or if he predeceases his rightful heirs, then full ownership and assets shall transfer directly to my biological grandchildren. DNA verification will be mandatory, with samples compared against my preserved genetic record held in trust by Brennan and Associates of Boston. I read that paragraph again, then once more, slower this time, making sure I hadn't misinterpreted the words. My grandfather Theodore, who had clawed Bennett Industries out of the dirt with his bare hands, had anticipated exactly this. He must have seen something in my father, something calculating and dangerous, and so he built safeguards that couldn't be finessed or ignored. The next page in the folder nearly slipped from my fingers. A scientific report, dated only last month, from a genetic testing firm. Somehow, Cordelia had arranged for DNA testing. The results were written in bold, clinical language. Christopher Bennett, no genetic relationship to Theodore Bennett. Another line followed. Sample labeled JB, 99.999% probability of grandpaternal relationship to Theodore Bennett. My stomach dropped. She had tested me. Somehow, Cordelia had gotten hold of my DNA and compared it to my grandfather's. And it proved what the rest of the documents had whispered all along. I was Theodore Bennett's only biological grandchild. A sticky note was attached, the handwriting unmistakably Cordelia's. Coffee cup from James, taken during Burlington Medical Center visit, February 2nd, 2024. Chain of custody maintained through Brennan and Associates. February 2nd. I remembered it clearly. I'd been there for a routine physical required by the company's insurance policy. Somewhere in that sterile waiting room, someone had collected my discarded coffee cup, logged it, and sent it off for testing. The following pages weren't photographs or birth records, but financial statements and legal briefs. Bennett Industries and its connected holdings were currently valued at $74 million. But what mattered more was the legal commentary. Case law on inheritance fraud, precedent rulings, and highlighted sections about criminal liability. If my parents had knowingly suppressed Theodore's will, if they had deliberately placed Christopher forward as heir while sidelining me, then this wasn't just betrayal, it was fraud. Fraud that could end in prison sentences. At the very bottom of the stack was a simple business card. James Brennan III, Senior Partner, Brennan and Associates, Boston. Beneath it, a handwritten note. We've been waiting for your call for 15 years. Everything is prepared. I sank against the seat, the folder heavy on my lap, its weight pressing into my chest like judgment. For years I had believed I wasn't good enough. That Christopher had something I didn't. Polish, charm, education. Every cold look, every dismissive word from my parents had fed that belief. But none of it was about me being less. It was about me being more. Too legitimate. Too real. Too dangerous to the story they'd chosen to sell. My phone lit up again, vibrating against the leather seat. This time it was my father's name glowing on the screen. I stared at it, my thumb hovering, and wondered if he was calling to smooth things over, to spin another lie, or if someone had seen me talking with Eleanor Kane. I let it ring until the call ended. Then, with a calm I didn't expect, I blocked his number. Then my mother's. I already knew who I needed to speak with. I picked up the business card, dialed the emergency number, and waited. Brennan and Associates. A woman's voice answered crisply. This is James Bennett, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Cordelia Bennett's nephew. I'm ready to claim my inheritance. There was a pause, long enough for me to hear the sound of papers shuffling on the other end. Then her voice came back, quiet but certain. Mr. Bennett, we've been expecting your call. Can you be in Boston tomorrow? Yes, I said without hesitation. First thing in the morning. I'll bring the folder and identification. Good, she replied. Then it begins. The line clicked off, and the silence inside the truck roared louder than any applause I'd ever heard. Mr. Brennan promised he'd clear his schedule for me. I ended the call and started the truck. As I pulled away from the estate, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The ballroom still glowed with golden light, laughter and music spilling into the October night. They were raising glasses to Christopher's future, congratulating themselves on what they thought was victory. None of them knew that by morning, everything they'd built on lies would begin to collapse. The drive home felt like drifting through a dream. Caroline was waiting when I walked in, robe tied loosely at her waist, Emily curled up asleep on the couch beside her. She looked at me, searching my face, knowing before I said a word that something had shifted forever. I laid the folder on the table, sat beside her, and walked her through each page, each revelation. Her hand covered her mouth, her eyes flashing with shock, then anger, then a grief that mirrored my own. They stole your entire life? She whispered. No, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. They tried. Theft only works if you never get caught. The next morning, while most of Vermont was still buzzing with gossip about my dramatic exit from the party, I drove to Boston. James Brennan III greeted me in his office, the kind of place that smelled faintly of leather and old books. He looked exactly like a man who had spent 40 years navigating betrayals that tore families apart. Silver hair, razor-sharp suit, and eyes that didn't miss a thing. Your Aunt Cordelia was extraordinary, he said as he laid out additional documents. She spent 2 decades building this case. She knew your parents would eventually reveal themselves. She wanted you armed when that moment came. Why didn't she tell me? I asked. She tried. When you turned 18, she mailed you a letter. Your parents intercepted it. At 25, she showed up at the mill, hoping to speak with you directly. Richard had her escorted off the grounds, threatened her with a restraining order. After that, She realized the only way to help you was to let your parents destroy themselves with their greed. The legal battle stretched for 6 long months. DNA tests confirmed what Cordelia had already uncovered. I was Theodore Bennett's only biological grandchild. Christopher resisted at first, hiring his own attorneys, demanding independent tests. But DNA doesn't lie, even when people do. His results came back with no biological connection to the Bennett line. It wasn't just the truth that undid my parents. It was the fraud. Knowingly trying to override Theodore's will, filing false inheritance documents, attempting to pass a non-biological heir as the rightful successor when a blood heir still lived. Their own lawyers eventually admitted they faced prison if they pushed the fight any further. We met in Brennan's conference room on a rainy April morning. The weight of months of depositions, hearings, and filings hung heavy in the air. My parents looked older, smaller, the arrogance gone from them. Christopher sat beside them, his Harvard polish dulled, confusion etched deep in his face. "I want to know why," I said, looking straight at my mother. Margaret's carefully built mask cracked at last. "You were Helena's child," she said bitterly. "Every day you looked more like her. Richard loved her in a way he never loved me. I was the second choice, the practical choice. But Christopher, he was mine. He was supposed to be my vindication. So you punished me," I said, my voice low, "for being born. We gave you a life," Richard said hollowly. "A home, an education, a job." "No," I told him. "You gave me scraps from a table that was already mine." Christopher finally spoke, his voice breaking. "I didn't know. You have to believe me, James. I had no idea I was adopted." I studied him for a long moment. Technically, he wasn't my brother at all. But I saw no malice in his eyes, only hurt. "I know," I said at last. "You were as much a pawn in their game as I was. That was why, despite my attorney's warnings, I didn't take everything. Cruelty wasn't in my nature, no matter what they had done to me. I claimed Bennett Industries, the company my grandfather had built and the one he had protected for me. I kept the family estate, not for the marble and chandeliers, but because it was the place where Theodore had walked the land with me as a boy, telling me stories about perseverance and legacy. But the rest, the accounts, the portfolio, the wealth that came without roots, I left divided. My grandfather's will had made me heir, but my conscience wouldn't let me destroy what remained of my brother's life. The legacy was mine, but how I carried it forward would be my choice, not theirs. I didn't take everything from them. My parents kept their savings, their retirement funds, enough to live without fear of poverty. Christopher walked away with his education intact, the car he'd cherished, and a $2 million trust. It was enough for him to build something of his own, independent of the Bennetts and the lies that had carried him this far. "Why?" my father asked me that morning in the conference room, confusion plain on his face. "Why show mercy after everything?" "Because I'm Helena's son," I told him. "And everything I've learned about her says she would want me to be better than you." When the papers were signed, I changed the name immediately. Bennett Industries became Helena Industries. Every truck, every office wall, every letterhead bore the name of the woman I never had the chance to know, the woman who gave her life so I could have mine. 5 years later, the company was nearly twice its former size. The formula wasn't complicated. Hire and promote people based on skill, not family connections. Treat employees like people, not stepping stones. See their families as part of the business too. Success followed naturally, and for the first time in decades, the company was not just profitable but respected. Christopher left for California, far from lumber, far from Vermont. He built a small tech startup, and though we shared nothing of our lives, we still exchanged Christmas cards. Distance made it easier to pretend we had never been raised as brothers. My parents lived quietly in Burlington in a modest apartment. They never knew the building was mine. I told the manager to never raise their rent, to handle repairs immediately, to keep them comfortable. It wasn't forgiveness. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't like them, that bitterness didn't own me the way envy owned them. Eleanor Kane still wrote to me every year on March 15th, my true birthday. Every envelope contained a photo of Helena. The resemblance was undeniable. Same steady eyes, same defiant jawline, same hint of a smile. She was radiant, and from every story I'd heard, she was good. She had dreamed of becoming a teacher, of helping children discover their own worth. She never had the chance. But her son now ran a company that funded scholarships for aspiring teachers across Vermont. In her name, the dream lived on. Emily is 13 now. She knows everything. She knows about the betrayal, the lies, the years stolen from me. But more than that, she knows what family really means, that it isn't money or blood or the name etched into a gate. It's truth, choice, and showing up when it matters. She will inherit Helena Industries someday, not because of entitlement, but because she's already earning it. She shadows me at the office, asks sharp questions, learns how to lead. She carries both of her grandmothers inside her, the one who raised her and the one she'll never meet. Sometimes, late at night, I drive past the old estate. Another family lives there now. Their lights glow from the windows. Their laughter carries into the trees. I don't feel envy anymore. The bitterness is gone. Instead, I feel grateful. Grateful that Cordelia sacrificed 2 decades to fight for me when no one else would. Grateful that Eleanor had the courage to step out of the shadows and place the truth in my hands. Grateful that my grandfather had the wisdom to guard his legacy from his own son's weakness. Family fortunes aren't really about dollars. They're about power, about control, about the stories we tell ourselves about who is worthy. My parents told themselves a story where I was nothing more than an obligation, while Christopher was their triumph. But the real story, the one carved in DNA, in court records, and in my mother's memory, was that I was always the rightful heir. Not because of privilege, but simply because I existed. The night Eleanor handed me that folder, she gave me more than documents. She gave me the right to stop fighting for something that had been mine all along. And in the end, the greatest inheritance wasn't land or companies or money. It was the knowledge that I had always been enough. Even when the very people who should have stood by you tried to convince you otherwise, the truth has a way of waiting you out. If you've stayed with me through this story, chances are you know something about betrayal inside your own family, about being dismissed, about having to fight tooth and nail just to hold on to what's rightfully yours. Let me leave you with this. The truth never really disappears. It might hide for years. It might take a stranger stepping out of the shadows. It might arrive through a single scrap of paper or a voice on the phone, but eventually, it comes forward. Justice keeps a perfect balance sheet, even when people try to rewrite the ledger. Your value isn't decided by who accepts you or who pretends you don't matter. It isn't measured in inheritance papers or in who sits at the head of the table. It's written in the choices you make, in how you rise when others try to bury you, in the kind of person you decide to become despite their rejection. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my story. If any of this strikes a chord with you, if you've carried the weight of family secrets, or lived through the pain of being cut out, or had to stand your ground against the people you once trusted, I'd like to hear your story too. Share it in the comments below. And if you know someone who's walking through that same loneliness, someone who needs to be reminded they aren't the only one, pass this along to them. And if this story gave you something to think about, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories to tell, about truth, about justice, about the tangled web we all call family. Because sometimes the best form of revenge isn't stripping everything away from those who wronged you. It's building something stronger, something lasting, something better, out of the pieces that were always yours to begin with.